Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and I am the Math Lab Coordinator at Walter State Community College. And you can reach me at beth.dixon@ws.edu. If it is not the spring of 2020, you can find me in the Math and Behavioral Social Science building. That does not look like a B. Let's make that look like a B. In room 222, if it is the spring of 2020, you know what happened during that spring, and I am not currently in my office, but otherwise I'm in that office from 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. If it is that spring, I'm not. And no, that was a strangle, not a cough. I'll get me a drink of my unsweet tea there. We are working through the final review and we're up to page 10. I'm so excited. And we're ready to do problem number 33. And this is for Math 0030. That does not look like a zero. In problem number 33, in 1995, the United States recovered 23% of its municipal solid waste through recycling, up from 17% in 1990. Write two ordered pairs in the form of the year percent solid waste. So the year, okay, in 1995, 23. So that would be 1995. 23, which was up from 17% in 1990. So that would be 1990, comma, 17. And it told me to put it year percent. Now, it's not written in the right order because the percent and years are in different orders. And as we look at that, we had to switch it around, but it is now in the right order. So that's the answer for part A. Part B asks us to find the slope. So I'm going to switch to the other pens. I'm tired of writing in those pens, so I'm going to switch. So I want to find the slope, which would be m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. That would be x1, y1, x2, y2. Remember, every ordered pair is an x and a y. That's the first point. That's the second point. Doesn't really matter. I could have written them in any order, so it doesn't matter, but I'm going to write them in this direction. So that gives me 17 minus 23 over, and since I started with the 17, I'll start with the 1990 minus 1995. So 1990, and I'm just going to use a calculator and do my subtraction here. 23 minus, 17 minus 23, which gives me -6, and 1990 minus 1995, which is -5, and -6 divided by -5 equals 1.2. So there's the slope, 1.2. Interpret means to write a sentence or write some words. Anytime you see the word interpret, that means they want words. And it wants it a rate of change. And remember, slope is always rise over run. And since I have rise over run, to interpret this, it's always going to be the y unit over the x unit, or it's going to be the y unit per x unit for the interpretation. So what is my y unit? Well, x's and y's. My y is percent, And then the X unit would be, the X's are years. So again, let me say that. As I'm going to interpret this, I have Y unit. What are my Y's measuring? Well, that's the 23 and the 17. The 23 and the 17 are my Y's, and they are percents. And they're the percent of solid waste recycled. And the X unit is just the years. And it's a rate of change. So is it positive or negative? Well, it's positive. So it's increasing because it's positive. So it's increasing 1.2% per year. Well, what's increasing? Recycling. I'm not going to get real fancy. Your teacher may say the percentage of United States municipal solid waste through recycling percentage increased 1.2% per year from 1990 through 1995. I don't know. You don't need to get that fancy. Increasing 1.2% per year. That's the real key. 1.2% per year, and it's increasing because it's positive. Okay, let's look at number 34. Number 34 says riding in a taxi for X miles costs Y equals 2X plus $2 and $2.50. So $2.50. Okay. And identify the slope. The slope is always the number in front of the X. Remember, Y equals MX plus B. M is the slope. It is the number in front of the X. So the number in front of the X is 2. So the slope is 2. It is not 2X. It is the 2 itself. So interpret the slope as a rate of change. Well, again, we want the Y unit per X unit. And unit means what it's measured in. If I didn't say that before. Unit means the type of inches, miles, measuring that we're doing. So in this case, the Y is dollars, Y dollars. So it's Y unit is dollars per, and the X is measured in miles. So the 2 would be increasing $2 per mile. So interpret it as a rate of change. Well, in this case, it's a taxi ride. So I really wouldn't say increasing $2 per mile. I would say they're charging $2 per mile. And notice I even abbreviate the dollar sign because that's how we would write it. We can also identify the y-intercept in this case, which would be the y-intercept is your B, and that's the number by itself, which is $2.50. And the y-intercept, remember, is when x equals 0. It's the point 0, 250. So what does that mean? What is the interpret the y-intercept? When you take a taxi and drive 0, I won't write out the word, 0 miles, they charge $2.50. And I don't have to write dollars because I can use a dollar sign. But in basic, you know, you can even write it simpler than that. The taxi charges $2.50 before counting the miles. And I didn't spell mileage right, but just ignore that. Okay. Now let's solve equations. And we have, for 35, we have 6 equations to solve. So we have the first equation, which is 4x plus 8 equals -4. Remember, in solving equations, our goal is to get x by itself. If x is by itself, we have solved the equation. So for the first one, 4x plus 8 equals -4. To get the x by itself, the x is multiplied by 4 and then add 8. So we're going to work in reverse of our order of operations and subtract the 8 first. So I'm going to subtract 8, subtract 8. That gives me 4x equals -12. Then divide by 4, divide by 4, and x equals -3. And I'm not going to try to squish these into the room that they gave me. So for the rest of these, I am going to work them out on my whiteboard. So the next problem on this page, I have, and you can't see it, but I can, and I'm going to rewrite them. So for 35B, we have 1/3 x plus 4 equals 13. Now, there are 2 ways that we can do this. We can do this by getting rid of the fraction first, or we can wait a step and get rid of the fraction in the second step. I'm going to wait till the second step because that 4 and that 13 don't have fractions. So I can take care of that first, because if this is here, the first thing I want to do is move this number over to the other side. And I can do that by subtracting 4 from both sides. And if I do that, that doesn't involve the fraction. Just ignore that it's a fraction. Just leave it where it's at. And that gives me 1/3 x. The 4's cancel. 13 minus 4 equals 9. Make sure 13 minus 4 equals 9. It's been a long day. And that gives me 9. And then I want to get rid of the fraction. And in this case, it will actually solve it for us because it's 1/3. But if it didn't, I would do this in 2 steps because of the fraction. But because I have a 3 in the denominator, I want to multiply both sides by the 3 so that I no longer have fractions. If there was a 7 in the denominator, I would multiply both sides by 7. If there was a 2 in the denominator, I'd multiply both sides by 2. By choosing that denominator, that then clears me of my fractions. So I'm going to multiply by 3, multiply by 3, and that clears up my fractions. The 3 times 1/3, do that in your calculator if you need to. It basically lets the 3's cancel. 3 divided by 3, because this is 3/1. 3 divided by 3 gives you 1. 1 times 1 is 1 and gives you x. 3 times 1/3 gives you 1. And that then gives you 9 times 3, which is 27. And my x is by itself. And I'm through. Now, I did not check the first one. I'm not going to go back and check it, but I am going to check this one and remind you how you can check your answers. I'm going to type 1 divided by 3. Then in parentheses, I'm going to place what my x is, which is 27, plus 4, and I should equal that 13, which I do, which tells me this answer is correct. And that is letter B. Now, if you say, well, wait a minute, I erased that, and you erased that too soon, I wasn't through looking at it. Remember, these are videos. You can rewind. The lovely part of rewinding. So letter C, 8x minus 7 equals 3x plus 23. Notice this one has x's on both sides, so we'll need to gather our x's and gather our numbers. So I'm going to move the x's to the left. I tend to move my x's to where I move my smaller x to my larger x. If your teacher says to always move your x to the left, that's also another good plan, but you want to have a plan. Planning is essential. So when we have this, we want a 3x and we want to move it over here. The opposite of a positive 3x is a minus 3x, so I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. Then that gives me 5x, subtract 7, these cancel and leave the 23 on this side. Notice I'm kind of tucking in, but I leave that equals underneath. That format can help you keep up with numbers. Okay, now I need my 7, which is a number by itself, over here with the 23, which is a number by itself. So I'm going to do the opposite. The opposite of a negative 7 is a positive 7. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So negative 7 and positive 7 add to 0, so they cancel and leave nothing. I leave my equal sign exactly underneath. Bring that 5 in toward the equals. 23 plus 7 equals 30. Now I have all my x's combined, all my numbers combined, and I have just one term on each side. Now I have a multiplication left here, and I can say 5 times x. So I'm not going to subtract 5. I'm going to do the opposite of multiplying, which is dividing by 5. If I divide by 5, I'll need to divide by 5 on the other side. The 5's divide out and leave me 1. And in division, canceling leaves me 1. 1 times x is just x. And then 30 divided by 5 equals 6. To check this problem, I take my calculator, 8 times the x is 6 minus 7. When I hit enter, I get this 41. Well, what does that 41 mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything unless the other side of the equation also equals 41. So I'm going to take 3 times the 6 in place of that x, then plus 23, and it should also equal 41. If the two sides are equal, if they're the same, then we know that we have made them the same and we've solved the equation correctly. Let's look next at that was letter C. Let's look at letter D. Letter D throws in some parentheses. 5 parentheses x plus 6 into parentheses equals 7 times x minus 3. So 5 times x, we'll use distributive property here. 5 times x is 5x. 5 times 6 is 30. Equals 7 times x is 7x. 7 times 3 would be minus 21. That's 7 times a negative 3 to give me a minus 21. Again, I'm going to gather my x's and gather my numbers. I'm going to move the smaller of the x's. In this case, that's the 5. It's smaller than the 7. The opposite of 5x is a negative 5x. So I will subtract 5x from both sides. That brings down the 30. 7 minus 5 is 2x minus 21. Then I don't want to move the 30 over here because that would capsize my equation. That would leave a 0 on one side, and I don't want to do that. I want numbers on one side and variables on the other. So I need to move this number over with this number, and that's numbers by themselves. So that's a negative 21. The opposite of that would be a positive 21 to add 21. So a negative 21 plus 21 would add to 0. 30 plus 21 would be 51 equals 2x. And then that's multiply, so I can divide to get the x by itself. And 51 divided by 2, I could write that as a fraction, but I kind of like just 25.5. It's a little easier to write. Now, again, I can check this answer. 5 parentheses 25.5 plus 6, and I'm going to get 157.5. If I do the other side, 7 times 25.5 minus 3, I get 157.5. It's not what they equal, but that they equal each other. And in this case, I know my answer is right. And that is letter D. Okay, we're ready for letter E. This is 35E, and that is 5 times 4x minus 3 plus 2 equals 8x plus 23. I'm going to multiply 5 times 4x, then 5 times 3. Notice the parentheses tells me where to stop. It's my stop sign. The beginning parentheses tells me where to start my multiplication. The end parentheses tells me where to stop. That gives me 20x minus 15. Then that plus 2 just drops down. There is nothing to simplify or to multiply, so I will just copy down the 8x plus 23. Next, I want to combine like terms here on the left side. There is no like terms to the 20x, but a negative 15 and a positive 2 is a negative 13, and you can check that on the calculator, but that will give me a negative 13 or subtract 13. If it looks like a negative, it acts like a negative, it is a negative, so we'll just leave one sign there. And then that's 8x plus 23. Again, I'm going to move the smaller of the x's. That's a positive 8, so I make it a subtract 8. What I do to one side, I do to the other. Then 20 minus 8 is 12. Bring down that 23. Notice again, I keep that equals lined up, not exact, but close enough. Then I'm going to take this number and move it over with the 23. So that's a negative 13, subtracting 13. The opposite would be to add 13. So that gives me 12x equals 36. 23 plus 13 would be 36. Then take divide by 12, divide by 12, and x equals 3 because 36 divided by 12 is 3. Again, I can check this. 5 parentheses 4, and then in place of an x, I'll put 3 minus 3, that ends of parentheses, plus 2, and I don't care what the answer is. I just want to make sure that when I substitute it on the other side, that I get that same answer. And I do. Last problem. And I know this is a longer video, but it had some more problems on it. And I wanted to get the whole page in. So we have 7x minus 5 times 3x minus 8 equals 35 minus 9x. And so this is our last equation. In this case, notice we are multiplying through by a negative 5. So that's negative times a positive would give us a subtract 15x or a negative 15x. A negative times a negative is a positive. 5 times 8 is 40 equals 35 minus 9x. If you miss this problem, it is probably in this step. Negative times a positive is a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive. In the next step, I'm going to go on and combine like terms and go 7 subtract 15, which gives me negative 8x plus 40 equals 35 minus 9x. Now I'm going to move the smaller of the two numbers, and even though 9 is larger than 8, negative 9 is smaller. I'd rather only be $8 in debt than $9 in debt, and I would rather it be 8 degrees below 0 than 9 degrees below 0. Negative 9 is further to the left on the number line, therefore smaller. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And that doesn't really need 2 lines. And that gives me 35 on this side because that goes away. And positive 9 and a negative 8 gives me 1x plus 40. And I don't need to write the 1. I did that for emphasis. And then I need to move the 40 over to this side. So that's a positive 40. So I will subtract 40, and that gives me x equals negative 5. 35 minus 40 would give me negative 5. And so negative 5 is my answer. I don't need to divide because it's already an x by itself. So I'm going to type this in. Everywhere I see an x, I'm going to type in a negative 5. Notice I do that by putting in parentheses because as I check it, I can see that I've substituted in. And again, it's not what one side gives me, it's the fact that both sides give me the same thing. If it does not, then I know I will have made a mistake. And then again, I've got the right answer because both sides gave me an 80. And that is the last problem on this page. So that concludes page 10 of this Math 0030 review. Again, if you need to reach me, you can reach me at beth.dixon@ws.edu. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.